Russian warboat has taken a hit against a big Ukrainian iceberg, and now there is water flowing into the compartments. This has been the worst month for Russian war operations in Ukraine so far. Every day it is becoming more and more obvious that whatever Russian goals in Ukraine war or still are, Russia is not approaching them in any kind of sensible manner. Arguably, they're not being approached at all. This is demonstrated by Ukraine taking out over 90% of the Russian gasoline production capabilities all across the country, or Ukrainian drone crews taking out 75 oil tankers in the Sea of Azov in the last 5 days with the drone strikes. All of those very successful operations in their own manner, but as a systematic approach, this is truly painting a very grim picture for Russia. Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I still remember the time on this channel when you and I talked about the outlook for the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And I was telling you that it's not looking good for Russia, that Russia has certain strengths, but they were seemingly losing the moment, and Ukraine was slowly but surely changing the dynamics. Yet Russia still had a lot of stockpiles that allowed them to keep that advantage. At that time, it sounded a bit crazy. Why would I be so optimistic about Ukraine? Yet now, when we see the changes that are happening on the front line and in Russia as well, we suddenly are reflecting on this outlook once again, and now Ukrainian actual victory is already not looking so unrealistic anymore. Yet there are still myths that are being repeated about the Russia in this context that are polluting the conversation and painting inaccurate image of things to come. One of those myths is the Russian nuclear weapons, where people think that Russia uses nuclear weapons, then ... something happens, Russia wins. When you actually start unpacking that, then it turns out that this is not a solution for Russia at all, and it's bringing more problems than solving them. A similar kind of aspect is about Russian invasion into the NATO territories. NATO countries stop supporting Ukraine, Russia wins, which is an absolute non-starter in any kind of reasonable thinking. You just need to stop, reflect, and think about the logical chain in this. It just does not work out. But one still persistent third narrative is about Russian mobilization, where supposedly there is a lot more nuance in the previous two examples. So let's once and for all dissect it and understand exactly why it is not a working solution for Russia. Remember, everything that we do on this channel is to support the Ukrainian armed forces, so please participate in the fundraiser. Links you can find to it in the comment section down below. We're going to be progressing by the points from the lighter ones to the heavy hitters as we go along, so the absolute bangers will be at the end of the video. Make sure to stay tuned. And the first one is that Russia has actually tried doing mobilization already. We saw the consequences of it, and it was tied to a very strong political and economic costs for the Russian government. Putin is building his whole narrative on the idea that there is an absolute unity within the Russian society in support of the war. Russia is trying to build this picture that everyone should be supporting the Russian aggression. Unfortunately, that picture isn't really working out anymore. It did work out sort of a little bit when the first mobilization started for Russia at the end of 2022, because there was some kind of Russian aggressive drive, like we're gonna crush Ukraine, we're gonna do whatever we can. We saw videos of people going to these mobilization centers and then drinking vodka, thinking that they basically gonna go to the barbecue in Ukraine, just gonna fry some Ukrainians and get an easy ride home with some stolen toilet. Yet reality came a little bit harder for them than they were expecting. Remember, this was the perception of the war. If you're looking sort of like on hard facts, what was seen there by the Russians. The numbers here are not, well, devastating. By today's standard, the numbers are terrifying. And a lot of Russians really understand that this time, this is not going to be a barbecue ride. Whenever someone gets mobilized in Russia, then they're going basically one end and one end only. A lot of Russians that are coming into the Russian military right now, they're doing so for the money. Because over the years, Russia has increased the amount of money they're paying for the people that sign on this military contract. So you can argue that current Russian military is a mercenary army, so to say. And Russians sort of understand and know that once they get conscripted, that's it. And this is the only thing that's selling them to them. When we start seeing that there's going to be some kind of a forced mobilization, it's going to change the whole dynamic, which obviously brings a lot of instability and political capital for Russia. First mobilization that happened in Russia was already problematic. Russians saw the biggest decrease in popularity of Putin and the governing elites since basically the start of Putin's reign, so to say. It was truly terrifying for a lot of the Russian politicians. In some more harsh regions where people are a little bit more forceful, such as Dagestan, we even saw some clashes with the authorities, and it was truly problematic for them to hold. But more importantly, it was also painful economically. One of the important calculations that is not being discussed a lot in the Western media is the amount of expertise that was drained from the Russian economy. We talk that a lot of the, for example, Russian IT specialists or high-tech specialists, they left the country. One of the reasons why Russia right now cannot develop a lot of the weapons that they want to have to match Ukraine is because a lot of these specialists are now outside Russia. Obviously, over the years, a lot of them returned. But if this is going to happen again, then this situation is going to repeat, and arguably it's going to be even worse. Russia is going to lose not only people that are not going to be conscripting, it's going to be people that will not join and just going to run away. This is going to be completely devastating for the Russian economy that is already struggling. More importantly, the mobilization in Russia, because it's a very old school society, targets specific groups, cohorts of the population, which is men from like, let's say 18 to, well, Russia is pretty old, so let's say 60, which is quite an important also part of the Russian society. A lot of the Russian culture and Russian economy is not built on the equal opportunities structure. So it was often the man of the family that was providing for a large parts of society. So Russia would just take out those main economic generating parts of the society, and that would be pretty catastrophic as well, because Russian economy is struggling. Point number 2 is that math is just not mathing. Russian recruitment drive has been falling sharply. It's been really problematic for Russia, despite the increase in amount of money they're paying their conscripts. The number of conscripts has dropped incredibly. Last year, around the same time, Russia was arguably conscripting some 38 to 45,000 troops per month. Now, this number is closer to 25 to 35,000 per month that Russia is conscripting, if we're judging by the same sources. And discussions right now is that this mobilization to kind of circumvent the point number 1, which just looks scary, but I don't consider it as scary as Russian politicians are. And to circumvent that political cost to that, they're stating that this mobilization could be slower, that they could see potentially mobilizing just tens and 20,000 people additionally per month, which arguably is not going to be, when you take out the amount of people that don't want to sign the contract anymore, and suddenly you start getting people in forcefully, then suddenly you might not see such a big increase in numbers as they were expecting before. The reality is that numbers that are being thrown out about the Russian mobilization, that Russia wants to mobilize additional, I believe, 1 million to 1,200,000 over the couple of months, that is not a high number of recruits. Arguably, if we believe the data that says that it's going to be 1.2 million actually over a year that Russia is planning to mobilize, then that's not going to increase that number a lot at all. Russia will be able to sort of keep the status quo. Well, they have manpower advantage, but it's not going to be groundbreaking status quo change where Russia suddenly will be able to crush anything that Ukraine is going to throw at them by just the sheer number of lemmings running towards the nearest drone. Therefore, so far circulating numbers for mobilization are, to be honest, with the drop in conscription rates, not as scary as a lot of people try to paint it to be. For Russia to actually be sort of like scary that it's going to fundamentally change the situation frontline, Russia would need to conscript some 5 million people in 1 year or something. That would be impressive, but that's also very, very costly for the point number one. Next point is arguably even worse for Russia, which is despite the number of troops that they are conscripting and potential for increase in that number, the quality of troops is dropping constantly. Not only because Russia is not having enough people that are subscribing, and a lot of the people that are signing the contract with Russia are just very, very fringe members of the Russian society, so to say, is that a lot of people are not really willing to participate in system, and they are using the easiest ways to get away from any kind of system building altogether. They are not participating in training new troops. They're just saying, do this and go and fight for the glory of Russia. Just don't touch us. They don't have proper training centers. They don't have the proper infrastructure. And when people are going to get forcefully mobilized, if there will, then suddenly you're introducing a whole new caliber of people into the military. We are talking people that actually did not want to be there, period. And suddenly you are discussing, well, if there are people in Russia that don't want to be in military, that arguably are already threatening Putin with mutiny, well, suddenly now you have people that just don't want to be there at all. Once again, people that got mobilized in the first wave, those people thought that they will just go out and chill in Ukraine, and they slowly got adapted to this new reality. In modern Russia, everyone understands that if you just get sent and forcefully mobilized, then you basically are sent to your deaths. The only saving grace for Putin is that because everyone signs the contract, they seemingly will be essentially joining the Russian military voluntarily, so to say. You signed the contract, therefore, well, why are you asking for something to change? This is not the same for people that are going to get mobilized. Anyway, this is going to create a whole another problem for the Russian already shaky military, that these new people are going to come in large quantities with no desire to be there. And that is already a problem for Russians, as this creates opportunities for Ukrainian to exploit. One of the best options for Ukraine is when the Russians are essentially don't want to fight and just run away from their positions or something. So all of these so far have been sort of like light points. Now we're getting into the actual interesting ones. And the first one is equipment and skills. As I mentioned in the previous one, training is not something that Russian military does a lot. And more importantly, having equipment for training is also a big problem for Russia. If before we were talking about, well, there was some heavy equipment for Russia, so they could conscript people, they can put them on the infantry fighting vehicle, and they just can send the infantry fighting vehicle to attack Ukrainian position. That war has ended. New type of warfare needs people to understand how technology works, and they need the military to operate a lot of technological possibilities on the front line. Russians don't have that. They don't have enough equipment to support all of the operations. This is one of the major complaints for the Russians, that what they're stating is that no matter how many people you're gonna send, it's not gonna work out because we just do not have enough like drones or controllers, or we don't have enough these heat cloaks or whatsoever to fully supplement the current needs of the military. And you're asking us to try to even more supply with the troops that are coming. Once again, we're thinking about this in a paradigm that supposedly newly mobilized troops will come in and then they will break the situation on the front line into the Russian favor. That's not gonna happen. Getting more manpower is not the same as getting more combat power, which gets us to the point number 5. The rate of advance with dominant manpower on the front line is not favorable for Russia. I know a lot of you are looking right now at the front lines in Ukraine and are thinking, it's like, well, you know, Russia is not advancing, therefore Ukraine is just, you know, breaking Russian ability to advance. And that is true. But what you do not know is that arguably right now, if we're talking something like manpower, then in main directions, Russia has the advantage of manpower something like 5-1. 5-1 in certain directions. And with 5-1 manpower advantage in those directions, still, Russia has microscopic advances on the front line. Let's say Konstantinivka, let's say around Pokrovsk. All of those movements are pitiful. And that's already with manpower advantage. If suddenly, with everything that we said before about that it's not going to be that big wave of manpower that's just going to come into the Russian armed forces, again, it's not going to change the nature of war. Nature of war changed completely. Manpower is not playing that same breaking point as it did even a couple of years ago. By this point, just having more manpower at one direction means you're gonna have more bodies piled up on your way there. And finally, the most devastating fact about the mobilization and why it's not gonna provide any solution is that Ukraine changed the dynamics of war. Ukraine is fighting Russia by exploiting Russian systemic weaknesses. Russia having more manpower never was a systemic weakness. At no point when Ukraine was fighting Russia and finding ways to fight the Russians, they were thinking that Russians are gonna run out of manpower. That was not the case. Ukraine always fought the system behind it. And mobilization does not work because it's actually producing more stress on already stressed system. Ukrainians targeting Russian soldiers to force Russia to more aggressively conscript is exactly what they were trying to do by targeting the Russian manpower, what Madjar was telling about. When Russia says we're going to mobilize and force people to come in, they're going to introduce even more stress to the system that Ukraine is already targeting. It's not going to change anything. The main and key point is what Ukraine is targeting that's gonna provide more issues for the system. Logistics. You introduce more manpower, sudden that more manpower needs a lot more gasoline, needs a lot more trucks, they need a lot more drones. And if Ukraine takes out the ammunition plants, the drone producing plants, the gasoline trucks, the gasoline refining factories, what are these mobilized soldiers gonna be fighting with? And that is why mobilization is not a solution. Arguably, it's gonna make things even worse. Thank you for watching this video. This week has been absolute garbage for me. I'm sorry that the video is coming out just now, but I'll try to make videos as fast as I can. It's been really rough. In any case, I love you. Trust in Ukraine, support Ukrainian armed forces, and I will see you next time.